Well, we always knew children were susceptible. The belief is that they're less susceptible than adults, so they're less likely to contract the virus than adults, and that when they do get the virus, they're less likely to have a bad outcome. And the data seems to support that, but they're not impervious to the virus. They do get sick, they do get infected, and we have seen some bad outcomes in children. We also don't know what it looks like when this virus becomes epidemic in children. We don't know how many kids have actually had coronavirus. There aren't any good seroprevalence studies to look for antibodies in kids to see what the exposure has been in children. And it might be the case that a smaller percentage of kids in the United States have had this infection at this point than adults on a relative basis, because the very first thing we did when we had these epidemics was close the schools. And so that closed off an avenue of spread. And I would venture to guess that parents with school-age children were probably more adherent to the stay-at-home orders, wearing masks, good hygiene, because they were doing those things to protect their kids. So it might be the case that a smaller percentage of kids have actually been exposed, and so we don't know what it looks like when this becomes epidemic in children in the same way, for example, flu becomes epidemic in children every year.
If the virus outbreak stays at the current pace, are we going to be able to send our kids to school in the fall?
I don't think so in the South. I mean, if they don't correct the situation, and they don't have a lot of time to do it in states like Texas, Georgia, Alabama, California, Florida, Arizona, it's going to be very hard for local school districts, parents on boards of local school boards, to make decisions to open those schools. I think in the Northeast, we will be able to open the schools. In the North, I think parts of Northern California, San Francisco will be able to open the schools. We should really try to do that. There should be an emphasis on doing that, because we might be in a situation where we have to close the schools again later on in the school year. Getting kids back to school, socializing them, getting them started on classroom learning, if we have to go to distance learning on a selected basis as outbreaks occur, it's going to be really important to get them back into the classroom, at least for a period of time. I think that a lot of states in the South really have lost the opportunity to do that, because they have to make those decisions in July. Those schools open in August in many cases, and so they're probably going to have to at least start the year with schools closed in a lot of parts of those states.
Do we know any more, Dr. Gottlieb, about that syndrome that had been affecting growing numbers of children, and we haven't talked about, frankly, in 6 weeks to 2 months?
So there was a really good analysis study published in the New England Journal of Medicine about 2 days ago that I would encourage people to take a look at, that gives sort of a qualitative assessment of 99 cases in New York City. It appears to be a post-viral syndrome that occurs about a month after the virus. What we still don't know is what is the total number of kids who had the virus. We know how many kids had this syndrome. It appears to be sort of a post-viral inflammatory syndrome, could be quite severe, sort of like a Kawasaki's type syndrome, where you get inflammation of arterial vessels. It could have disturbances in the heart. It's treatable. But what we don't know is how many kids have been infected with coronavirus. Are we seeing 100 cases and there's been, 100,000 kids infected? Or are we seeing 100 cases and there's only been 5,000, 10,000 kids infected? It's probably the case that a lot of kids have had this in New York City, and it's a low incidence event. And you do see these similar post-viral types of syndromes with other viruses, including coronavirus, where you also see, on rare occasions, a Kawasaki-type syndrome with other forms of coronavirus. And so when you see these epidemics of viruses, enterovirus, echovirus, sort of move through a population, you will see a month later, 3 weeks later, a preponderance of these post-viral kinds of syndromes. So this isn't that unusual in many respects. We just don't know what the incidence is of it. Let's
drill down, if we could, on some of the hottest of hotspots in the U.S. Today, 6,500 new cases down in the state of Florida, which we just discussed. Governor DeSantis saying he's not going backwards. He's not going to shut things down. I'd like to remember what he said about his state, Dr. Gottlieb, back in May. We'll react to it on the other side.
You got a lot of people in your profession who waxed poetically for weeks and weeks about how Florida was going to be just like New York. Wait 2 weeks, Florida's going to be next. Just like Italy, wait 2 weeks. Well, hell, we're 8 weeks away from that, and it hasn't happened.
We have flattened the curve. Florida's done a truly remarkable job here because the people of Florida stepped up. Your governor, your administration stepped up. You implemented the guidance, not just for nursing homes, but for every American.
Dr. Gottlieb, I turn back to you. Why has the situation in Florida grown so precarious? And what do you make of the fact that testing in that state is going down dramatically while cases are going in the opposite direction?
Well, look, I think we need to show a lot of humility in the face of a virus that we don't fully understand, that's very contagious and wants to course its way through the population and become epidemic. And we shouldn't take anything for granted. This is a deadly virus. It's highly contagious. It's going to continue to threaten us until we get to a vaccine or we get to higher levels of spread where it just starts to reduce, the transmission starts to be reduced because a lot of people have had it. Or we start to take universal measures like universal masking, where we're taking precautions on an individual basis, on a wide basis, that's going to reduce the spread. Now, testing is up substantially in this country. We're testing well more than 500,000 people a day. That's going to continue to grow. But it's not a national testing market. It's very regional. So a lot of states have a lot of capacity, but they don't have the ability to move that capacity around. So when this becomes epidemic in states like Texas or Florida, suddenly they become pressed in terms of their ability to expand that capacity. And that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing effectively under-testing. You're seeing shortages of supplies and equipment to do the testing. And you're seeing delayed turnaround times because Florida can't suddenly increase its testing capacity dramatically. You can't move the testing capacity in Massachusetts down to Florida. Really, the only swing capacity we have in this country is Quest, LabCorp, and BioReference Labs, the large commercial national laboratory chains. And they can only do so much to move testing into a market where there's a great need because they have a lot of obligations in other markets as well.